The answer is hugely, but consumers, not just in India but everywhere, are adopting AI very rapidly. Companies are doing less so. There are two verticals that we've seen very significant AI adoption. The first is around autos, and the second is around financial services. And the reason in both cases is there's an outside economic threat. In the case of autos, it's Chinese EVs and AVs. The Chinese can produce one at $25,000 or $10,000 BYD using God's eye, the technology used for AVs. And in the case of financial services, the fintech platforms, you see that heavily in India, are disintermediating, disrupting traditional banking and financial services. So the real key to AI adoption, which is not about technology, it's about workflow and about change management, is external threat. And whilst people are doing well, as I say, turkeys don't vote for Christmas, in that circumstance you don't get violent change until there's reason to do so. And the biggest disruptor inside companies is probably not the CMO, it's probably not the CIO, Chief Information Officer, it's probably the CFO, because that's where the pressure to be efficient and effective comes from.
So if you may ask you, like, what advice for young investors or person who are thinking for entering into the industry or growing in a different channel?
What generally, what advice?
Generally, what's your advice?
I think the answer is to learn Chinese. There's also to learn Spanish, and to learn code, but with AI you don't have to do any of that because AI will do it for you. But you get the drift. The world is changing. India is emblematic of that. India's growth last year was the most rapid. The World Bank is forecasting this year and next year will be the strongest growth country. So India will be at the center, the third largest economy by 2050, already in the top 5, growing like Topsy, growing by 5-6% a year, which is, I come from the UK where we're lucky if we grow at 0.1% in the quarter, let alone 1%. So at the center, and in an Asian context, because of the Chinese political threat around Taiwan, I don't think they'll invade, but I think they'll constrict. India is the alternative. And the Indian economy, along with places like Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore, will continue to grow. And given the way the world's going, less globalization, US-China geopolitical threat from Russia, threat from Iran, given the fragmentation we're seeing, and the lower growth, higher inflation generally, higher interest rates, two things are really important. One is choosing the geographies where you operate, so India scores heavily on that count. And secondly, also where India scores, is making sure that technology is applied at scale to get efficiency and effectiveness. So India scores on both counts.
So it will be my last question from my side.
Yes.
So what defines successful brand building today? Like a single term accepting the China?
Well, it's a really interesting question because I think people are becoming much more short-term. If you think about, if you're running a listed company, you're really focused on quarterly growth. You have to go in front of institutional investors and retail investors and say what your top-line growth is and what your margins are. So there's a quarterly focus. Private equity, which controls huge swathes of, say, US and UK industry, and increasingly in India, private equity, very focused on short to medium term, 5-year hold periods average. And venture capital, the first question you ask in venture capital is, how do I get out? So people are very much short-term in their thinking. So coming back to your question, long-term brand building is being displaced in the short and medium term by a focus on activation and performance. That's absolutely critical. Yeah, I think it's the wrong thing, but it's a factor of the change that we're seeing and the volatility that we're seeing.
Thank you so much.
Very much. Thank you. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you.